I'm sure they knew it was a Civil War building. It's just there's really never been a, let's say at least early on, there was never an attempt to restore some of the historic properties around the battlefield at the same time they were restoring the area to its Civil War appearance. Okay, I'll let you pass by. One of the most asked questions I get is the orientation of the house, because in the Forum's book I wrote, which by the way is out of print, you see this image, and the house is a T. So when I showed you other parts of the house from the front, that's the long part of the house, and the T part is on the back, and it runs up to the back of the 17th Pennsylvania Cavalry Memorial. So that's how close that was to the monument. And look, there's the monument before it was vandalized. Today there's a whole bunch of pieces that are replaced. Oh, and here's the an 1880s image of the McLean farmhouse. Here's a picture of the McLean farmhouse from the Oak Ridge Tower. And I really get a kick out of it because it says in the caption, "The Red Barn." How do we know the barn's red? Unless they didn't tell us. And accounts of the battle refer to the Confederates coming out from behind the Red Barn. But here's the earliest close-up we have of the barn. So I'm pretty sure the park used this to restore it. You know, many of the farmhouses, we really don't have photographs of them until the 1880s. So 20 years after the battle. And sometimes it's a guess as to what the structure looked like at the time of the battle, as opposed to restoring it in its 1880s appearance. That's why, remember, about 25 years ago, we had a cultural resource manager, a maintenance man. And he pushed this concept that we should stop restoring the battlefield to what it looked like at the time of the battle, because we will never know. And so he came up with this. Do you remember what it's called? Memorial landscape. And they were restoring the battlefield to its 1880s appearance. They were tearing down 1863 stuff so they could restore it to 1880 stuff. And pretty much the public at large was upset about it and forced them to stop doing it. And the cultural resources manager is somewhere else now. So, you know, it's really, again, it's really tough. I don't think there's been the same emphasis to preserve Civil War structures as they are at the time of the battle that we have for other features on the battlefield. And one reason I say that is because obviously people have to live in them. And this is always an interesting subject for me. The park, and maybe rightly so, since I always talk smack about them, they decided a long time ago that the best way to keep a building from being burned down by an arsonist is to have somebody living in it. If they restored all the houses on the battlefield to their Civil War appearance and they didn't let anybody live in them, they feared that they would be vandalized. And so by having a ranger live in them for reduced housing, they can preserve the houses better. Which, you know what, it's probably true. Probably. But it somewhat annoys me that they were going to a house, ripped the 1863 features out, and put in modern walls and modern plumbing just so that we can save it, you know, the outside of it. I guess it's a controversial thing. So here's, I just have on our map the area around Barlow's Knoll. I don't know why he didn't do it here, but Barlow's Knoll, if it's a name that's not really associated with the battle, but a name we commonly use today, like Party Field, on some of them, like the Angle, I got them to put quote marks around it. And that made me feel better. Like the Angle. So this shows a couple of the houses up along Harrisburg and Carlisle Road. And I just wanted to mention George Weissmantle. He lives near Rock Creek over here. And to give you an idea of where his house is today, it would be at, is it Excalibur Towing?
Yeah.
You know, the tow company? I remember when I was younger, it was a restaurant there. Did you ever eat there? I thought it was a pretty good restaurant. A country restaurant or something. But, you know, every time there's a flood, that place floods out. George Weissmantle's family lived there. He was in the Army. His wife and 2 children lived there. He was killed at the Battle of Suffolk as a member of the 165th Pennsylvania Infantry in May of 1863. After the battle, his wife got sick from a contaminated well, and she died of disease in September of 1863, and the 2 children were sent to Iowa. And if you're interested, George Weissmantle, he's buried in the Evergreen Cemetery with his wife, and he has a really, really, really nice patriotic grave that you can visit. That has a really nice motif. You know, when a soldier died during the war, they oftentimes got a really nice stone that has, you know, and it tells about his death on there. He's buried not far from John Burns, if you know where that is. Oh, wrong way. So I was really proud of my efforts to document the people that lived on Seminary Ridge at the time of the battle. You know, I written a book on Lee's headquarters, and then I wrote another book on John Burns, and in both of those books, I researched this area because they lived nearby, or John Burns fought nearby. And I was really proud of the fact that I put the Alexander Riggs house on the map, literally. That house was not labeled on the Warren map, and it wasn't put on maps people were drawing of the battlefield simply because it wasn't labeled. And I guess I'm guessing that people assumed if it wasn't labeled that Warren or whoever the engineer was drew it but knew it wasn't there during the battle, so didn't label it. And so they would erase it from their maps. But sure enough, Alexander Riggs lives there. The house is owned by Caspar Henry Dustman. There are quite a few houses at the edge of the town at the time. And you got to see down here at the bottom of the map, no, Elizabeth Schultz, who undoubtedly is Libby's cousin. All the Schultzes are related. Okay. Down Confederate Avenue. Confederate Avenue obviously was not there at the time, but there was a farm lane that came off of Middle Street, and it ran down to 2 houses. The Henry McDonald House, which no longer stands, would be in the middle of that development off of Bridge Road. And then the McMillan House, David McMillan House, that one of our guides lives in. What's his name?
Doug Dowds.
Doug Dowds, who is a former Marine colonel and a really good guy. And here is a view of the original McMillan House before it became greatly altered. Yeah, this is a view that's not out there, that's not been seen. The views of the farmhouses, the earliest ones we can get, sometimes are not as well publicized as other views that are around. But this is a really nice view from the McMillan family. There's still members of this family around. Yeah, it's been in a couple books, but not done this well. And of course, you know, if you're really on all the Facebook sites for Gettysburg, this has been on Facebook. Now the house oriented originally facing east, and then when it was actually picked up, spun around in a circle, now faces west. because the farm lane came in from the east, and now West Confederate Avenue is on the west side of it. So originally the farm lane is down the hill. The guy who lived there in the 1960s and 70s, he gave the park a lot of trouble about park versus public property and how's his property, and they almost, yeah. He was a professor at Gettysburg College. The park almost were going to make him lose his access to his driveway from West Confederate. And if he wanted to be such a jerk, he could find his own access to his surrounded property. I didn't like the guy either. I think I would push for that. Luckily, let me just tell you this. Luckily, I am not in charge of anything. Don't want to be in charge. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stories we could tell you about him in the park. Here, what do I got here? Oh, this is the Fairfield Road area, and it shows a couple things on it. There was a farm that was owned by George Arnold and the bankers, and I think it still exists. Oh no, this one does not exist. It would be under like the Cumberland Township Municipal Building. Do you know where that is? And there was a house there, the Hoarding House. And I actually have a photograph of it. I don't think I put it in the slideshow. But George Arnold, the banker, owned it, and a tenant was living there. Of course, it's south of the Herbst Farm, and I cut it off, but there's the Emmanuel Harmon Farm, of course, which my colleague Andrew Dalton wrote a book about. And Peter Stahl Smith House. Does everybody remember? If you used to drive along, wow, what is it called?
Today's Park Avenue.